Good evening.
Good evening. Mr. Chairman, are we on here?
We're trying to do this in 30 minutes.
Yes, sir. Mr. Chairman, members of the commission, thank you for inviting us to speak. I'm Don Phillips. This is Peter Adang. We have the rest of the science team here. And should you have any more detailed questions, I'm sure we can answer any questions you might have about the science behind this ordinance or the ordinance itself. In Sandoval County, there are two major geologic provinces. There are 12 major geologic provinces in the entire United States, and you've got two of them right here. The Colorado Plateau and the Basin and Range Province. Let me back up for 1 second, is that in the San Juan Basin, up in the northwestern part of the state, a part of the county, that's part of the Colorado Plateau. The Albuquerque Basin is part of the Basin and Range Province. Now, it's important to distinguish between the San Juan Basin and the Albuquerque Basin. They are different ages, they have different burial histories, and they have different tectonic histories. In fact, the San Juan Basin was formed during the Rocky Mountain period, 80 to 40 million years ago, and the Albuquerque Basin, as we know it, formed 14 million years ago, and it is still active. There's 26 million years between those two basins. Another thing to point out is there's a lot of production up in the San Juan Basin, but very little, well, actually there's no production in the Albuquerque Basin. And the reason for that is because the migration of oil and gas, as documented in 1995 by Curtis Huffman, stated that, as you can see in the orange there, the migration of oil and gas in the Mancos Shale happened after formation of the San Juan Basin. So that structure, those structures were already there, and when oil and gas migrated, it migrated into those structures. That's why there are so many oil and gas fields there. But the Albuquerque Basin formed after the migration of oil and gas, at least in the San Juan Basin of the Mancos Shale, so that's why there's no production there. Let's step back a minute and we talk about the Albuquerque Basin as part of the Rio Grande Rift. There are 4 active continental rift systems on Earth. There is the East African Rift, the Lake Baikal Rift in Asia, and the West Antarctic Rift, and our very own Rio Grande Rift, which we are sitting right in the middle of. The key word here is active. What does that really mean? Well, it means that the faults move. And seismic activity is a very, very risky thing, and this is acknowledged by the United States Geological Survey and New Mexico Tech. For USGS said for New Mexico, the area that is home to more earthquakes than any other region is the Rio Grande Valley between Socorro and Albuquerque. New Mexico Tech has said because of the large number of active faults in the Rio Grande Rift, the probability of a future large earthquake in the rift is significant. And in that paper, this map was posted by New Mexico Tech, and it showed, you see those two red circles there, that down in the Permian Basin, seismic activity has been recorded due to withdrawal or injection of oil and gas. And gentlemen, that is part, the end phase of the fracking process. And furthermore, up at the north in the Raton Basin, the University of Colorado just came out with a study that said the hydraulic fracking up there is causing seismic activity, and it is a fact, both in New Mexico and Colorado. The bottom line here is this means that the Albuquerque Basin is not stable. Existing faults are subject to frequent movement by settling or additional upwelling and extension. And I repeat that the Albuquerque Basin is still forming. And that leads to increased seismic activity and makes it more vulnerable to earthquakes because earthquakes form when faults move. And that leads to inconsistent fault fill or fault annealing. Now, we have a continuous water aquifer that is mainly located within the Albuquerque Basin proper. It's called the Santa Fe Group. It has been consistently modeled by the United States Geologic Survey as being a continuous water aquifer. There was a report that was done, commissioned by Sandoval County in 2013, looking at the water resources planning study for Rio Rancho Estates. And it showed that if Rio Rancho Estates was built out completely, in 25 years, the drawdown would impact not only Sandoval County, but Bernalillo County, and in 100 years, it would impact Valencia County. And the important part here is that these consultants modeled the aquifer as a continuous water aquifer. Now, what is the risk to this aquifer from unconventional drilling? Well, it's the faults and the fractures in the Albuquerque Basin. The distance between the Mancos Shale and the aquifer is one thing. There are thousands of feet between the Mancos Shale and the drinking water aquifers. Now, this is something that the industry states over and over again everywhere they go. And it's a standard industry pretext. It's true in the San Juan Basin, as you can see here with the Mancos Shale, thousands of feet below the yellow up there, which is the tertiary water aquifer. But it is not true in the Albuquerque Basin, where there are so many faults in many places. The Mancos Shale is actually in fault contact with the tertiary water aquifer. And these are cross-sections from New Mexico Tech publications. Now you can just imagine if you drill down into the Mancos Shale, you go left and you cross one of those fault zones, and you are going to contaminate the water aquifer either with the released hydrocarbons or with the fracking fluids. Now, we also have abundant knowledge that these faults and fractures impact groundwater flow. New Mexico Tech says it, the University of New Mexico says it, and the USGS says it. These are all quotes from major papers. And that last quote from the USGS says, increased permeability along the fault zone can enhance movement of groundwater in contact with freshly broken rock. And when you frack rocks, they're freshly broken. Risk to the water aquifer also is about fluid movement or upwelling along faults. Now, in many places in the Albuquerque Basin, you have the Mancos Shale, very close fault contact to the tertiary water aquifer, and we have shown that that upwelling occurs. If it hits one of these faults and it's not sealed, it goes right up that fault due to pressure and goes right into the water. It will go right into the water aquifer. Now, who says upwelling along faults? Where does upwelling happen in Sandoval County? Well, according to the New Mexico's Tech study released this year, they said it happens on the southeastern margin of the San Juan Basin, it happens in the Albuquerque Basin, it happens in the Jemez Mountain volcanic field, and it happens in the Sierra Nacimiento Laramide uplift region. The only place it doesn't happen, at least that they didn't mention, is in the San Juan Basin proper, where there are no major faults. Where else is upwelling along faults? Well, according to papers published by New Mexico Tech, there's fluid movement in Placitas. The University of New Mexico in 2013, Dr. Amy Williams and her crew proved beyond a shadow of a doubt that in the southern part of the Albuquerque Basin, fluid migrates up these faults and contaminates the groundwater aquifer, and it comes from the basement. And they actually compared the isotopes of the basement rocks to the isotopes in the drinking water aquifer, and they proved it beyond any doubt. It's a landmark paper. Also, there was a paper produced, commissioned by Rio Rancho by Glorieta Geoscience in 2008. And there they cited that Peggy Johnson et al., who published a lot for the New Mexico Tech, has shown that elevated levels of total dissolved solids, arsenic, and uranium adjacent to faults have come up the faults in the Española Basin just north of the Albuquerque Basin. And that is facilitated by fracturing associated with faults. The other thing that study showed is a cross-section that showed the Mancos Shale is actually in contact again with the tertiary water aquifer. And then the consultants pointed out to Rio Rancho that this may also occur along the Ziana structure, where older rocks move up and in contact with the Mancos Shale and the aquifer. Finally, there was another well in this case. This is a map of water wells in Rio Rancho. The white circle represents a well number 10, which was drilled, and it encountered a major fault zone at 970-foot depth and lost all of its drilling fluid. It had to move over and re-drill the well. Then there was a well number 23, test well. That well encountered high levels of uranium in the lower, middle, and upper Santa Fe groups. That is, gentlemen, the entire water aquifer. And not only did they encounter high levels of uranium, but levels of uranium that are higher than the EPA set maximum contaminant level. This was not trace elements. This was a maximum contaminant level. And in order to get that much uranium in the entire aquifer, it had to have come up, the fluid movement, it had to have come up the faults. Now let's talk about risk a minute. Risk about the faults and just general risk. Now, we've heard New Mexico Tech's talk about susceptibility and risk. Now, susceptibility to an average geologist like Eddie Paulsgrove or Bill Brown or me means the state of being likely or liable to be harmed by a stimulus. If you stimulate something, what's the likelihood you're going to have something happen? Okay, but the way risk is calculated here is it combines susceptibility with the costs of the hazard, loss of life, monetary, and environment. Well, what that basically says is that there is greater risk increases near cities and towns where there's a high population. And one of the things that was said by one of the thrust energy consultants from the west side of Sandoval County in the Albuquerque Basin, it's pretty obvious that if you're saying that the east side down in Corrales, the city of Rio Rancho, and down by and in the River Valley that the risk is moderate to high, I agree with you. And who wouldn't agree with you? But on the other hand, they said outside of cities and towns that the susceptibility is low and there is a low risk. Well, this is how the energy industry calculates risk. I was there. I know that's how they do it. How much will it cost the company if there is a disaster? It's more about money than it is about people. And this leads to degradation of the land, environmental racism, and social injustice. And let's go back and let's look about risk, where risk is moderate to high. And this is according to New Mexico Tech and Thrust Energy, where, first of all, they have said that you can't drill in Corrales because it's too risky. And then so let's put a center, one of those slash circles in Corrales. And then they said the same thing in Rio Rancho. So you can't drill there, it's too risky. Down and in the River Valley, you can't drill there, and that takes care of Algodones and most of the pueblos along the River Valley. Can't drill in Bernalillo, can't drill in Placitas, it's too risky. You can't drill on the eastern mountains in La Madera, it's too risky. And you can't drill in Cochiti Lake, it's too risky. So where, the risk, they said, is far different than what you find on the western side of the county. So what they're basically saying to you is that the only safe place to drill and do hydraulic fracking is right where Thrust Energy owns its acreage. Our ordinance basically says we currently have 3 districts, and today we are proposing, because we've heard that you want to maybe move to 2 districts, we are suggesting via an amendment that we recommend 2 districts. District A, which is the San Juan Basin and a permissive use where all the oil and gas is drilling now, won't disturb anything up there. District C, the Albuquerque Basin and Transition Zone combined, we recommend conventional oil and gas drilling be allowed via conditional use, and that unconventional oil and gas drilling, which is hydraulic fracking and horizontal drilling, be prohibited. I want to point out that there's several reasons for combining these 2 districts and into one big district. And number 1, there's 4 reasons. It's based on solid science. We have got really good scientific data in breaking up these districts. We also know that the entire area is very heavily faulted, and we've just explained the problems with heavy faulting. And then we know that in the Albuquerque Basin and Transition Zone, this will also protect the watersheds, and there are at least 13 watersheds as defined by the USGS in this area. Forest fires have removed vegetation and caused massive debris flows in the Jemez Mountains around the Valles Caldera, and that threatens contamination of the water aquifer. And I want to give full credit and point out to Phoebe Sweeney of the High Watermark Environmental and Scientific Consulting, pointed this out to us, and she has a compelling scientific story for that. And I was also supported by Brandon Velavis. in getting these maps. Also, this area should be combined because it is an area of many sacred cultural sites in pristine wilderness, all the way from the Valles Caldera to Mount Taylor. It is our responsibility and our duty to protect these sites. Now, there's been a big to-do about people saying that you can't prevent hydraulic fracking, you can't ban it, and what I'm trying to say to everybody is that if I was in the oil and gas business, that's what I'd be saying too. But the fact is that this is a big movement around the country, in fact around the world. 5 states have banned hydraulic fracking. There are cities and towns and counties and other parts of the states, Ohio, Pennsylvania, even Texas has done it. And there are countries, whole or in part, who are banning fracking around the world now because they recognize the value of doing that to protect their drinking water aquifers. You know, as I've shown, that Pennsylvania has had a problem with drinking water being polluted, coming out of, so much methane in a person's water well that it comes out of the sink. You want to pour a drink of water, and what gets so much methane in it that you can't drink the water, but you can certainly light it on fire. And Wyoming, it's happened in Wyoming. It's happening now in North Dakota, in Canada, in Australia, and in our 2 neighbors, Colorado, it's happening now, and Texas. It's coming our way. And are we going to let this happen in New Mexico? Gentlemen, it's up to you. So I'd like to turn this over now to my colleague, Peter Adang.
Well, with that applause, this is probably a hard act to follow. I want to talk about the legal implications of the science team ordinance. When the Citizens Working Group was established in March, the mandate that was given to it was to produce an oil and gas ordinance that provided for aquifer protection. The science team of the Citizens Working Group did produce such an ordinance and produced it within the time limit that was given by the county commission. That ordinance originally was structured with 3 districts. It's now being changed to 2 districts, but the concept was to allow pretty much all kinds of oil and gas production in the San Juan Basin as a permissive use with some conditions on it. In the rest of the county, the idea was to allow vertical conventional drilling as a conditional or special use, and to prohibit or limit unconventional drilling. And I'm going to use the term unconventional drilling in the same fashion as the gentleman from New Mexico Tech. That is to mean horizontal drilling and hydraulic fracturing. As we got into the process of drafting an ordinance, the members of the science team who have scientific backgrounds, and that did not include me, quickly realized that permitting unconventional drilling here in the eastern part of Sandoval County was highly dangerous to the aquifer, that there was a high risk of contamination of the aquifer. That was before the New Mexico Tech report, the first one, even came out. When the first New Mexico Tech report came out, it confirmed what the science team had already decided, because as I recall, in July, when we had another one of these sessions, New Mexico Tech put some of its material up on the screen. There was a chart, and one of those charts showed that if you allowed unconventional drilling here in the eastern part of Sandoval County, there was a moderate to high risk of contamination of our aquifer. The most recent material from New Mexico Tech, which we saw tonight on the screen, on pages 40 and 41, I think reinforces what New Mexico Tech said previously. Because if you look at those maps on pages 40 and 41, it shows when you start at the Rio Grande River and start moving west, until you get to about or just past Zia Pueblo, the risk of contamination of our aquifer is high from unconventional drilling. And it only starts to reduce once you get past Zia Pueblo. So I think that the New Mexico Tech work has supported everything that our science team concluded a long time ago, and that is the justification for limitation of unconventional drilling in the ordinance that we have presented to the county. Now, naysayers have told us that, well, you can't ban unconventional drilling. It's illegal. We've been holding public hearings on this matter now since early July. Most of those hearings have been before the Planning and Zoning Commission, and I've yet to see any lawyer with a background in land use come forward and tell any of us, based on solid legal authority and good reasoning, that a limitation on unconventional drilling here in an environmentally sensitive area of the county is illegal. No one has done that. The only legal analysis that we've seen to date comes from the ordinance team. The packet of material that's on the county website for tonight contains the information that the ordinance team submitted, and a part of that material is a legal analysis that they had prepared. And I want to quote from that. It's not mine, it's theirs. The first question that their legal memorandum addresses is this: the power of Sandoval County to ban or burden hydraulic fracturing. So that was the question they were asked. Here's what their conclusion is. State law does grant counties broad authority to enact zoning ordinances and other ordinances that address health, safety, economic development, and other issues. The county's regulation must not conflict with state law. In drafting an ordinance, the working group should be mindful that the provisions complement and do not conflict with state law. So what they're saying is, if you draft an ordinance that doesn't conflict with state law, the regulation is all right. Okay? Now, going on from there, Sandoval County is not the first local government in this nation to face this particular issue. As has already been pointed out by Mr. Phillips, this matter has been addressed by local governments in many states of the Union. We have legal authority in 7 states involving the power of local governments to regulate oil and gas. Not operations, not how you conduct operations, but where you conduct them. Of those 7 states, 4 have ruled that local governments do have the authority to enact zoning regulations that prohibit unconventional drilling in certain parts of their jurisdiction. Those 4 states are New York, Pennsylvania, Illinois, and Texas. But in Texas, it was before the Texas state legislature recently amended its oil and gas ordinance to make it preemptive. So I'm talking about before the change in the Texas state law. But in all of those states, local governments use their zoning authority to district, and then within the districts to prohibit unconventional drilling in certain districts. In those cases, the regulations were challenged, and the courts in all of those 4 states stated that even though the state had an oil and gas statute, that statute was not preemptive of all oil and gas regulation. Therefore, local governments could use their zoning authority to determine where oil and gas development could and could not take place. Now, in the other 3 states where we have legal authorities, which are West Virginia, Ohio, and Colorado, local government regulations prohibiting unconventional drilling were ruled invalid, and the reasoning in those cases was the state statutes on oil and gas in those states was preemptive of all oil and gas regulation, and therefore local governments had no power to pass any regulations governing oil and gas development. So that raises the first question that we have to ask ourselves here. Does the New Mexico Oil and Gas Act preempt any regulation by a local government in New Mexico? And the answer to that question is no. The answer is no. And the reason we know that is that we have a case on it. The case is called SWEPI, that's an acronym, SWEPI, versus Mora County. And as I'm sure you probably know, Mora County some time ago enacted an ordinance prohibiting all oil and gas development within its jurisdiction. That ordinance was challenged in court. It was in federal court in Albuquerque, and the judge was Judge Browning. I might point out parenthetically that while all this was going on with Mora County, Santa Fe County, since at least 2012, has had an oil and gas ordinance. And if you have the fortitude to go through all 125 pages of it, you will find that the Santa Fe ordinance maps out in certain areas of Santa Fe County where oil and gas development is prohibited. And it's prohibited for 2 reasons in those areas. One is environmental and the other is cultural. But that's a digression. Let me go back to the Mora County case. The judge in the Mora County case ruled that Mora County did not have the authority to ban all oil and gas regulation within its jurisdiction. That's the only holding in the case. But that doesn't apply to our situation, because Judge Browning went on to say in that decision that the New Mexico Oil and Gas Act is not preemptive of all oil and gas regulation in the state. He noted that the state statute is not an environmental statute, it's a conservation statute. It's intended to conserve and manage the natural resource in order to maximize the state's return on oil and gas resources. So it's not intended to protect the environment. And indeed, if you look at the Oil and Gas Act in New Mexico, there's nothing in the statute that deals with aquifer protection, nor is there anything that deals with any environmental protection. And that's, again, because it's not intended to be an environmental statute. It's a conservation and management statute. If you look at the regulations under the Oil and Gas Act, you also find that there's nothing in those that involves aquifer protection. If I can turn the question around, it would be under the regulations that the OCD operates with, can the OCD deny a drilling permit application because the location of the well, it will endanger an aquifer? And the answer to that question is no. There's a specific provision in the regulations, and I can cite it if anyone wants it. That provision details the reasons upon which the Oil Conservation Division can deny a drilling permit. And those reasons do not include aquifer protection, and they don't include, in fact, any environmental protection measures. So, going back to Judge Browning's decision in the Mora County case, he said that because the New Mexico Oil and Gas Act is not preemptive. Local governments can regulate oil and gas operations or location of oil and gas operations where the state statute is silent. Where the state statute is silent. So I've already pointed out the state statutes and the regulations under the state statute are silent on aquifer protection or even environmental protection in general. So if they are silent, as Judge Browning pointed out, then the county has the authority to enact regulations. And the next question is, well, what authority does the county have over aquifer protection? Counties in New Mexico have the same powers as municipalities, and those powers are enumerated in Articles 3 and 4 of the New Mexico statutory compilation. I'm not going to go through all of them, but just to summarize, we know that under those statutes, counties have the authority to zone. Within their zoning authority, they have the right to create districts. In those districts, they can specify what uses are permissible and what are not permissible. So a county can create a residential district and not allow anything else in there. Can create a commercial district, an industrial district, an agricultural district. Those are powers that the county has from the New Mexico State Legislature, and the county has had those powers for decades. If that were all that were in the state statutes, I would say that would be enough to justify Sandoval County limiting unconventional drilling in one part of the county, that is the eastern 1/3. But there's more to the state statutory powers.
Mr. Adang, are you going to summarize?
Yes,
we got this point?
I'm basically done. The state has given the county under Section 3-53-2.1 of the New Mexico statutes annotated this power. It said, the statute says, for the purpose of preserving and protecting water resources and to provide an assured water supply for its inhabitants, a county may require site development standards. I don't know what more authority a county could have from the state to preserve and protect water resources. So the state legislature has said the county can protect aquifers. Under the Oil and Gas Act, it's silent. And based on the Mora County decision, I would say that regulation of where unconventional drilling can take place in Sandoval County is something within the power of the county under its zoning authority. So I think in that respect, the ordinance that's been tendered by the Science Committee is valid and will be upheld in a court action. In closing, I just want to make two quick points. The first is that, going back to what I said initially, the mandate that the Citizens Working Group got when it started was to create an ordinance that provided for aquifer protection. We have 3 ordinances on the table. Only one of them provides assured aquifer protection, and that's the Science Committee ordinance. The other 2 ordinances make unconventional drilling either a special use or a conditional use in this part of the county, and I submit to you that if you allow that, some company that's well financed enough and determined enough will get a permit to unconventionally drill in this part of the county. And once that happens, then the potential for degradation and compromising our aquifer is there. It's present. The second point I want to make is that eastern Sandoval County's most valuable natural resource is not oil and gas. Oil and gas has never supported this part of the county, and it never will in my estimation. The most precious natural resource that we have here is water. Over the past 40 years or so, eastern Sandoval County has prospered and grown because we have a water supply. We have a water supply to support a growing population and to support commercial and industrial enterprises that don't impact the environment adversely. It seems to me completely senseless to allow unconventional drilling in this part of the county and jeopardize our most precious natural resource, our water. When we trade it off against the remote possibility that some outside speculator will come in and pump a few barrels of oil out of a marginal aquifer or a marginal geological strata. So I think that that in order to assure protection of our aquifer, we need to adopt an ordinance like the Science Committee ordinance that limits unconventional drilling only in this one section of the county and to protect our aquifer, which is our most valuable natural resource. Thank you.
Thank you. Any questions?